My mic's working. Okay, good. All right, you let me know, BJ. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate you being here and all the coverage this year. Obviously, we made an announcement yesterday regarding JB's future here with us. We would like to thank JB for all his contributions to this franchise, this organization. I think it's undeniable the amount of success he's had with us, pushing us from a rebuild to where we are now. What makes this even more difficult is he was an incredible partner and personally a friend of mine, and we love him as a human being, and so that makes it even more difficult. I want to send a special thank you to Nikki Bickerstaff, his wife, and their kids and their family. They've dove into this community like none other. They're a fabric of the community. They gave tremendous contributions to Cleveland, and so we just want to thank them for their time here. Wish them obviously nothing but the best, and we'll move forward, but they'll always be a big part of our story. And so just wanted to thank JB to start, and we can open it up for questions now.
Koby, you mentioned last year to end the speculation at this time of JB getting fired on the heels of the next series. So what changed over the last year that made you feel like you had to make this move?
So I'll say, again, tremendously difficult decision. Not going to go into sort of any shortcomings or negatives about JB. It's not something that he did specifically. I think for us, it's with this group, finding someone with a new approach, someone with a different voice, a fresh set of eyes to help us move forward. And we've accomplished a lot in the last few years, getting to a conference semifinals, and we don't want to be complacent. We don't want to be content with that. And so what are the levers that we can push and pull to get to that next level? Because we feel we're not far off. We feel we have a tremendous amount of talent in-house. We have players that believe in each other, believe in this organization, and think they're pretty close. And so it's not one singular thing that JB did wrong. It's how do we continue to move this thing forward, because we don't think we're far off.
At this point, have you gotten assurances from Donovan Mitchell that he's going to sign long-term with you guys?
How long are we going to make that question? One, we can't talk to Donovan now about the contract until July. I'll say that my exit interview with him was really good in that he was talking about the future and how excited he was about the team, the organization. This is a player that has had two of the best years of his career here, has had a lot of success here, understands the infrastructure, I think, has a lot of trust on what we're doing, and understands that our goal is to win a championship. And again, when we're talking to him about the future here, getting his feedback, it's all about how do we make this thing better? How do we achieve this together? How do we win in the future? And so I take those as very positive things. From his own words, he says he's happy here. He likes it here. And so he's always been very genuine. He's always been very intentional. He's been a great teammate. And we have to take all that at face value and say, okay, we feel good about where we are with Donovan. Obviously, things could change. In terms of his contract future, it's nothing we can talk about until July.
How much influence does he have?
Yeah, how many questions? I'm sorry, go ahead. How much influence does he have? So last summer, he had a lot of influence in terms of how much he helped us recruit free agents to be here. Listen, you've talked to him. He's a highly intellectual basketball junkie, right? And so I would love to have some of his input in terms of, what we want to do into the future. And yeah, absolutely would love his feedback on how we continue to build this thing. I think he's been very influential in helping us land some free agents. That conversation will come for sure.
How do you think that Donovan and Darius work together as well as you thought they would, or do you see an issue there?
I don't. I think that's overblown. I'll say this. I think there's way more data that speaks to it works than doesn't. You know, in the last 2 years combined, because they've been together for 2 years, there's a lot of data that we can look at, right? And so over the last 2 years, including the playoffs, they're a net positive +5 together on the floor. Everyone wants to throw out the first year together when Darius actually had one of the best years of his career. He was an all-star, but he actually had more efficiency, and that was with Donovan. They have a great relationship on and off the court. I think the other thing that we have to realize is that, you know, this is just year 2 of this iteration of this team. And, you know, zooming out a little bit, when you look at some of the most successful teams over the past decade that had real success in the playoffs, they've had a long run at this thing. You know, going back to Golden State, that's been together for 12 years, that core. You know, look at Milwaukee, that's been together almost 11 years. When you look at Giannis and Chris Middleton and their run together, right? That's 11 years. Boston, I want to say 7 years together, right? And they're still knocking at the door, right, for that championship. But that's been a core that's been together for 7 years, had a lot of success together. Obviously, Denver, when you look at Jokic and Jamal Murray for 8 years, we're just in year 2 of this iteration. And we got to a conference semis. We're not content with that. But there's a lot of runway left, and there's a lot of learning left to be with this core. Listen, I think this pairing has a chance to be really successful together, and the data speaks to that over the last 2 years.
Do you anticipate not breaking that pair up?
I don't see why we should. You know, I don't see why we should. I think, and the same thing goes to the fit of the Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. That fit actually has a higher rating than our guards. I think the other thing too, like, again, you know, looking at it, there's a depth of talent here that's really, really good. And when you look at the landscape of the league and how long, like 82 games, we can't discount injuries, right? And it's part of our game. It's a horrible part of the playoffs this year. But I feel like, listen, when Darius and Evan went down, it was really nice to have Donovan and Jared keep us at a really competitive level, right? Same thing when Jared goes down in this playoffs with a broken rib. It's really nice to flex Evan into that 5 spot, right? We don't compete without Evan being in that 5 spot. And so I know people want to talk about the fit. I push back on that in terms of just the net ratings, but I also want to talk about the depth of talent here that's really good, that keeps us alive when we have to go through some injury spells.
Koby, what were your expectations for this season? And then how did this match with what you expected?
I wanted to be highly competitive in the playoffs. You know, we had a taste of playoffs last year, fell short with a young roster and inexperience. This year, I wanted to be highly competitive in the playoffs. I think we were. Obviously, we weren't whole. I'm not going to make excuses. I think a lot of teams are going through what we went through, so we can't just say this is a Cavaliers thing in terms of the injuries. Look, it's hard to say this season wasn't a success when you look at, you know, our first conference semifinals since 2018. And so, you know, we were disappointed with how it ended, but certainly through a lot of adversity this year, got to a point where we can look back and say, okay, I think we're going in the right direction. We're having success in the playoffs, and we're setting ourselves up in the future for a real run. And that's the key. You know, that's the key, is really diving deep into what are the levers we can pull, where we can clean up some things, how do we maximize some talent in-house to give ourselves a chance to make a run like some of the teams I talked about, right, that are 7, 8, 9 years into this thing and really knocking at the door championships, if not won a championship. We're just year 2 of this thing.
How high do you rate that you need to get an experienced head coach? I mean, for example, like when D-line, you had to make a change, John Quidd or whatever. You had JB there, and you had 2 trial runs to be a head coach, and there was immediate difference with that. So I just wondered, how do you, with this thing, like you said, there's high expectations for your team. So in terms of that profile of head coach,
Terry, it's an excellent question. I'd be lying to you if I said I've already dove into a list of people and criteria. We're going to take the weekend, decompress, come back Tuesday and really sit down with the staff and go over those questions. It's a massive undertaking. First of all, when you had a person, a man as good as JB, to get to the conclusion of, okay, we need to go in a different direction. So that has taken up all my mind capacity, along with combine and LA draft workouts. We're going to take the weekend and come back and really map out what that is. I think the difference between, and we haven't had a search for 5 years. We've had real continuity here, front office, bench. And so we haven't had a search in 5 years. That search 5 years ago is completely different than this one. This is a very highly specific job requirement in terms of the questions we're going to ask. Very, very specific to the talent level, very specific to how we can achieve even more than we have. And obviously some characteristics that we talk about from a cultural standpoint, but there'll be very highly specific questions that I think I'll have. But I can answer you more next week in terms of criteria, experience, and starting to compile a list.
Koby, this time last year, you were very adamant, no real need to look at major roster alterations, and you were true to your word. So as you stand here right now, do you, understanding what you said about the external perception about fit versus your internal evaluation of fit, do you have that same thought process right now that you don't need to make any major decisions or I should say alterations? And is that something you would be open to this offseason if opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, I don't see a big major sweeping changes. I just don't. Like I said, more data speaks to this works than it doesn't. You can't win 99 games over the regular season, make it to a conference semis and be like, this doesn't work. Again, this just being year 2 of this iteration of this core being together. I have a lot of excitement for the future for this group and belief in this group. The other piece that the outside doesn't see is you meet with every player and they have a really strong belief in the core of the group, their fellow teammates. They think they can win here. There's a lot of camaraderie and belief, and they like each other. And so it's hard for me to glean anything other than how do we pour more into the group that we have. Sure, there's some moves you can make, around the peripheral, but what are the levers we can pull? What can we tighten up? Where's our upside? Where's the low-hanging fruit in-house to elevate this thing? And like I said, way more data speaks to how much more success we've had with this group than it does, I think, the outside perception of fit. We've won too many games. We've had playoff success, and we're still young. We haven't even talked about Evan Mobley and his ascension. Like, he's continuing to get better. He's only known postseason basketball since he's been drafted. And to see him elevate Game 5 of Boston on the road and be the best player on the floor that night leads me to believe we have so much more to grow with him. And so there's a lot more in-house than I need to find out outside of this building. There's a lot of belief in our players and each other in this organization. And so I don't see the need to make sweeping changes.
There's a lot of conversation about floor spacing this year, and that 18-2 run, like that really showed.
Yep.
So how do you create that floor spacing with the two bigs? Because you're right about Evan, but he did that when Jarrett wasn't available. Darius seems to play better when Donovan is not on the floor. So I guess, where's the balance there, and how do you create that while maintaining the continuity of this core four?
Sure. I think one, the net ratings of both of them on the floor together is positive, right? From Jarrett and Evan and from Darius and Donovan, both positive to the almost to the tune of +5, right? When they're both on the floor together. I think it speaks to the depth of what we can do from an offensive standpoint. Why can't we do both? You know what I mean? Could it get a little clunky with two bigs on the floor? But guess what? On the other side, we're really good defensively. That's been true since we've had these two together. Been incredible defensive group, and that helps us win games in the fourth quarter as well. And so, do we need to look at diversifying the offense? Sure, that's something that we need to do. Evan continues to space the floor, and we want him to shoot more threes. He was in the 30s this year, and that's something that we're going to continue to elevate in his game. And again, continue to get better. You know what I mean? This is not the end of the story for this group. It'd be one thing if we just maximized everything, put everything into this group, and just kept falling short. Again, this is just year 2. Evan's just 22 years old. Jared's the oldest 26-year-old I've ever been around. And so I just think we have a runway here to figure it out and give him a chance at it.
How do you balance
Oops, go ahead.
You mentioned the young guys like Evan Mobley and
Yeah.
their development. How much does that specific part of this, the development of him and Darius Garland, weigh into off-season decisions with head coaching and even some of the roster decisions you guys will make?
So the Evan piece is a really fascinating study because the balance of developing a top 3 pick and the talent that he has with us trying to win big is really difficult. That's difficult for a head coach. That's difficult for an organization. Because if we weren't trying to win big, I'm sure we could have rolled the ball out and had Evan scoring 20 points a game. But that means Evan Mobley's probably not in the conference semifinals either, competing at the highest level. And so when you look at a top 3 pick like Evan, it's very rare that they play postseason basketball since the day they were drafted. You know, he played in 2 play-in tournament games his first year, played in the first round last year, into the semis this year, conference semis this year. We feel that's a huge part of his development. Just playing meaningful games is part of it. Did we get away from unlocking his potential fully? A little bit this year. And I think that needs to be a vocal point into the summer of how we can unlock him, only because it's going to make our team even better and give us a chance to elevate to a higher level. It's going to unlock not just him, but this organization. So that's certainly a vocal point. In terms of Darius knows he needs to have a major offseason. Him seeing the physicality of that series, of both series really, is something that I think he's going to grow from. He had a tough year in terms of the injury piece, losing all that weight from the jaw injury, never regaining that, trying to reingratiate himself to a team that was rolling as well, was hard for him. And I think he knows this needs to be a big offseason for him. But I love the experience we're giving our young guys. I just can't, I don't know how it's invaluable when you're playing in high-level playoff series, playing against the number 1 team in the NBA from a record standpoint, the Boston Celtics, going up against that experience. Evan by far is the youngest guy on the floor. Next was Darius. And so that's a core we're really excited about into the future, and giving them that experience in the playoffs was huge this year.
You mentioned the Bostons, the Denvers, Milwaukee's, Golden States. It seems like increasingly those teams are the outliers. Like a lot of the league changes around every summer. So how do you balance your long runway idea with maintaining urgency? Because you never know how long that runway is going to be.
Yeah, I think when you speak to the urgency, I mean, it went into the decision to dismiss JB. It's part of it. It's not being complacent. It's not saying, you know what, we know we're going to get back here next year, so let's just roll it out again. We know that we have a 22-year-old Evan who's going to continue to get better, so we got time at this thing. That's not the task at hand. The task is looking at every part of our organization and having that urgency, right? Not being complacent, right? Going into this offseason, look, it's a major decision to let go of your head coach. It is, after a half decade with him. It's a major, massive undertaking to do a coaching search. And we're going to embark on that and find the right leader to help push us forward. And yes, I think there's a long runway in terms of the talent, the guys that are under contract. That's exciting. But from a man in my office on the way out, every player said we're right there. We want to win this thing, right? We think we're very close, which is exciting for me. And now I have to find different levers to figure out how we can realize that potential.
To that point about time to evaluate everything, how do you feel you guys have done pulling the levers, and how do you feel about your place in the organization right now?
Whose place?
Yours.
Oh, my. I mean, listen, I think that's for you guys to decide. What we've done. I think, in a relatively short amount of time, we've rebuilt this thing to where it is now. Not so long ago, we were at 22 wins, and if we stayed like that, I wouldn't be here, right? So I think we've had a tremendous amount of success, but I would leave that to you guys to decide the job we do.
Koby, how
Yeah.
did you expect more from Spruce and Yang, especially Yang, in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think George would tell you, and he told me in his office, he knows he can be better in the playoffs. He knows he could have been better in the playoffs, just in terms of shot making. What he gave us over the regular season was 82 games. He's one of the only guys that played all 82 games. He brought a toughness, a competitiveness. He was serious, but also so lighthearted that he kept it. We went through a lot of adversity this year. The projected starting five only played 28 games together. When they did, we were 18-10, so it was pretty good. I think he will tell you that from a shot-making standpoint, he could have been a lot better in the playoffs. He did bring a lot to us during the regular season, which is part of it. And I think he knows from his standpoint what this offseason means, but he still has a lot of belief in this program. Max had the best year of his career, statistically. You ask him, he thinks he can do better. He thinks he can shoot better. There's things he wants to do better from a playing standpoint. We didn't know. I mean, I didn't know about the playmaking. We thought we were getting a basketball player. We didn't know that he was going to have the best year of his career from a statistic standpoint, passing, rebounding, defense. Brought a lot of intensity, a lot of seriousness. And he was the first one to say we're not content with just making the second round. This is a guy before us that went to 2 finals and a conference finals in between. So he has a lot of internal data of what that looks like and how you get back there. And so we love his leadership. We love his feedback. We're very, very happy with him and his play and his leadership and his fearlessness. I mean, there's the toughness, the grit. I mean, we put him against the best wings in the world, and he competed and gave us a chance on that end. He's a much better basketball player than I thought when we acquired him. Yeah. I don't. So again, absolutely, have to find the right leader. There's pressure in everything we do. So I get the importance of this. There was nothing that JB did categorically wrong. You know what I mean? That to say that now we have to get this right. I think there was a lot of things we did incredibly well over the last 4.5 years that he was at the helm. I think, going back to the original statement is, what's a fresh set of eyes look like? What's a new approach look like with this particular group? And how can this new candidate really, or new head coach really push us to the next level?
Like you said, you have a lot of search for years. So what are the mechanics of the search that you can share about? Obviously, you're running it, but who else is involved in working hand in hand with you? And to what extent do you think
Dan will for sure play a role. At the end when I sort of present him with our finalists, Dan gives incredible insight. I love when he's involved because it's just helpful. It gives you support, but it also he thinks outside the box. He pushes you, and so I'd say at the end he certainly would have a big influence on what we do. Obviously our front office will run the search. There's a lot of hours, days, weeks that pour into this decision. There's hours spent with the candidates. There's phone calls. There's background, and so from a just a mechanic standpoint, we're going to take the weekend off right now just to decompress a little bit. I know people already have lists that we have, but it's not true. We're going to come back on Tuesday. We're going to go over sort of characteristics. What are the specific questions that we have, and then start to compile a list and then go from there.
Koby, why did it take you a week and a half or whatever it was to do this thing with JB?
So, Terry, good question. One, there wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. You know, it wasn't like, oh, this is not gonna work. There's been too much success for us to have that conclusion after one day. It was going to take several days to really dive deep into the evaluation of JB, who deserved that. It certainly took. There was time spent with him as well during this process that he deserved, and I thought was really healthy in terms of our dialogue. And then also, not to make excuses, but you know, when you play a little deeper into the playoffs, it puts you right up against the draft. And so we were dealing with draft combine while playing Boston. So going back and forth. You know, last week we're out in LA for agent workouts. And so not that slowed it down, but it certainly added to what we had to do. And obviously we have the 20th pick in the draft. Draft is immensely important to what we do. And so those two things together sort of put us to where we are now. But I wouldn't have said it wouldn't have been appreciably earlier anyway. These are just the things that we've had to deal with over the last week.
Anything he could have said or promised to kind of get one more crack at it?
It's a good question, Terry. I think about that. I think for us, again, with this, keep going back with this particular group, I think a new approach was needed.
Koby, as far as the input that you received during the exit interviews, did that provide anything as far as making the decision for the coaching change from what you heard from the players directly?
So we always take input from players. I think it's definitely a valuable exercise. At the end of the day, you know, the decision has to come from me, and no particular player or players. I have to do what's right and find the right match for this set of player, this group that we hope will have a long runway and a lot of playoff success, and identifying who that is. And so we got a lot of positive feedback from players. You get negative impact from players, but my job is to listen, decipher through all of that, and come to a conclusion. There's feedback that helps us as a front office. It has nothing to do with coaches. There's feedback from an organizational standpoint of how we can get better. Those are the questions I'm asking too. How do we make this the best place for you to be successful? That's a driving force behind what we do. And so there's a lot of things we talk about, not just the coaching staff, but how we can improve. And we take that feedback seriously. But at the end of the day, you know, from a coaching standpoint, like that's my decision.
And as far as all the injuries that the teams had, you said that the starting five only played 28 games together. Yeah. Is it something that was it just coincidence, or is it something that you think maybe as far as training wise, that something needs to be changed or updated?
There's a few things that is the hardest things that we have to do. Figuring out this injury thing is not just particular to the Cavs. We had a hard year this year from an injury standpoint. Last year, we were actually pretty good from a games missed standpoint. You know, just, again, zooming out and looking at the league as a whole, I've never seen a playoffs like this where we've seen this many stars out, right? That was not specific to just the Cavs. And so I think just looking at, like, the landscape of the long season and what it entails now, I think it's a really good question. Like, how do we solve this player injury piece? And I think, you know, we have more meaningful games now during the regular season than we've ever had. And so we've added the in-season tournament, right? Now the NBA Cup that has, I think, 5 games of group play. That intensity gets risen, right? Those are playoff level intensity games that are in the beginning of the season. The play-in tournament at the end of the season, which we thought was going to elevate sort of the teams at the bottom to try to make it at the end and make a run at it. The unintended consequences, the top 6 teams don't want to lose and drop out of it. And so for the last few weeks of the season, you see a huge ramp up in load and in playing in meaningful games. And then the league adding the player participation program, you know, 65 games or less, puts another burden on this usage. And so now you're going into the playoffs, and over the course of 82 games, how much have we expended on these players' bodies? Something we need to figure out. You know, something we need to study. We need to figure out how to manage 5 games in 7 days, 3 games in 4 days. Big, it's a lot of games in 1 month. These are big questions for us, and it's something that we're trying to figure out to be better at. But you can clearly see this is not just the Cavs issue. We need to figure out how to navigate 82 games and then playoffs, and then us specifically post All-Star into playoffs. How are we playing our best basketball, and how are we healthy? Because if you look at it, and they're great teams still playing, but they're the most healthy teams that are still playing, and that's something that we're studying.
How much of that was over the course of an 82-game season, kind of managing a rotation, going a little deeper during the regular season? And do you think that it all had any effect? Second half drop-offs the last couple of years. Do you think that also plays into it?
I think Spencer, the one silver lining of the injuries was we actually figured out we had some depth. You saw the emergence of a Sam Merrill, which is incredible. Hugely important for us moving forward. You saw undrafted rookie Craig Porter Jr. figuring out that he has a real chance at this thing and to be successful and be a rotational player. Obviously you don't want to have injuries, but these are some of the silver linings that we figured out, that we have real depth of this roster. And then to your point, how are we using that depth over the 82 games and really diving into, how are we breaking up the game, the season into segments? And we want to be playing our best after All-Star and being healthy into the playoffs. Those are crucial questions. I think we have the roster to navigate that a little bit better.
Sorry, what I was going to ask earlier, did Donovan's contract status or Donovan's views at all impact the decision to hire JB?
No.
What's your timeline for wanting to have a new coach in place?
That's a good question. I think we'd love to have a coach in place for the draft. I think that might be that'd be probably too aggressive a timeline. It's when we come up with the right decision for who's the right match for this group. And if it has to drag on a little longer, it does. This is such an important decision for us. Like I said, we haven't had a search in a half decade. So we need to get back together as a group and really talk about criteria, the specific questions, who we want from a cultural standpoint, create a list, and then really dive those candidates, get to a finalist. And but I wouldn't say it's something that we need to rush.
I mean, you're not the only team that's looking for a coach, obviously. Other teams started that process
Yeah.
before you. Is there any concern that they're ahead of the game when it comes to that and you could miss out on somebody that you want?
Potentially, but that doesn't mean we need to speed up our process.
Koby, what do you think? Earlier, Jared had a broken rib. Obviously, this is what is your view of just his injury situation and how much it affected you guys?
It was massive. It was massive. The most important player we had all year in terms of games played and his value. He played 81 straight games, and having a pierced rib. I've never had a broken rib, but I've had several people reach out to me about how much it hurts. You can't drive to work, you can't sleep, you can't tie your sneakers. To give you some insight to what Jared did, Jared tried to give it a go. To the last day and a half, he was trying to go up and down on this floor and do some real basketball moves. It's hard to play basketball if you can't raise your arms over your head. I know there was speculation of more stuff he could have done. It's impossible to play through what he was playing through. Going through. It was a pierced rib.
Koby, last year going into the offseason, it was clear the bench needed to be addressed. You did.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the injuries, opened your eyes to the depth that you have. What do you think you're missing to get to that next level? Because you're on the doorstep.
You mean from a roster standpoint?
Yeah.
Again, I have great belief in the talent here. You know what I mean? If I didn't, I would say we're going to look at all these different things and maybe breaking up the core and trying to bring other guys in here. I think around the margins, how do we get better? How do we maximize the talent we have in house? And really try to pull levers that we have here, from every angle that we can look at to maximize what we have in house. And so we'll look. We've been super aggressive in the past. We've made this front office, we've made some sweeping changes. We've made some sweeping moves before. To the Jared Allen question, like Jared has a lot of equity here. I mean, we traded for Jared, and the whole trajectory of the rebuild changes, right? You go out and trade for a Larry Markkinen, who helps us achieve great level of success that future year. And then you go out and get a Donovan Mitchell, which is a monumental trade for a franchise. So we've made some major changes. We made some real injections of talent into this roster. And so now's the time to figure out, okay, how do we win with this big? Because we have had a lot of success with this group. You don't win 99 games and be back-to-back home court advantage playoff teams without that. And now it's trying to figure out, how to go further.
If it was a Pierce Grid, why was it listed as contusion? And did you feel like you had to do any repairing of the relationship with Jared because it painted him in a certain type of light and not what?
Good questions. I mean, it's all semantics in terms of what you want to list it for. No strain on the relationship, though.
Hey, real quick, you said that, and this doesn't count as but you said that Donovan and Jared were +5 net rate, and you said that Mobley and Allen were better. So you know what that number was?
Let's say it was plus 5.7. I can get you that number. I think it was higher. It was like plus 5.7 or something together, net rating together on the floor. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.